Hi, everyone. Welcome to this conversation. If you don't know me, my name is Gil Garratt. I'm the artistic director here at Blyth, and I have the tremendous privilege today of talking with playwrights Kelly McIntosh and Beath Badian, two dear friends of mine, incredibly talented people. There's really very little that defines Blyth Festival more than our commitment to new plays and to playwrights. And we talk about our mission to enrich the lives of our audience by giving voice to the region and the country. And I think that is embodied best by the work that we do with writers, bringing new stories, our old stories in a new voice to our stage. So I'm really grateful that you're both able to join me. And you've both had a pretty incredible and long relationship with Blyth, too. I was thinking about this. Just the idea of, I mean, Beath, you've directed on the stage at Blyth before. Kelly, you've performed on the stage at Blyth before, and done some directing, too. And both of you have written work that's been premiered at Blyth and are continuing to write now. So why? Why write plays? I mean, I think that's a really important question. Why write plays? But why write plays for the Blyth Festival? What is it about the Blyth audience, or what is it about working with Blyth that that inspires or maintains or helps a writer flourish?
I'm so happy to answer that question because the first time I went to Blyth, I had no idea that I would ever be a collaborative playwright, which is primarily what I am. I didn't train for it. I trained to be a Canadian actor. And I was very lucky to meet you and Paul Thompson, a director, one of the, I'd say, seminal artists of the Blyth Festival, who had a way of making plays where the actor was included in the process of the play creation. So suddenly found myself in the shoes of an actor with a pen, although you weren't really supposed to have a pen and a piece of paper. It was all up here. Right. So that was... I was stretched, my imagination was stretched in a way that I didn't know was possible. And it was just one of those things where I took to it. I loved it. I loved the experience of going with you, Gil, to go, meet these people who had experience in the 50s during the change in farming and what that meant, and learn about their lives and just really, Blyth is a great dichotomy because it's this gorgeous rural landscape with this theater company that's had decades of high-level, wonderful theater that's invested in telling the stories, as you say, Gil, that need to have some light shed on them, that are integral to the community, and there needs to be a conversation. So for me, I came at it as an actor and had the experience of rehearsing and writing a play with a group of people and interviewing people, and then we got it on its feet and the audience showed up.
Yeah. And
that experience, I'd never felt that on stage before.
No, me neither. It changed my life. I think that really changed my life.
Yeah, I'd like to say, I came to Blyth as an actor, and I left there, but it became an artistic home for me, as you say, as a storyteller, and actually understanding why I was doing what I was doing. And from then on, for me, it's the kind of theater that I want to do, where the audience is as invested and as part of the process, because it is such a fantastic dance when you get up there and get to perform for them.
That was Death of a Hired Man, was the title of that show. But I had the same experience in a lot of ways. Was like that thing. I'd trained as a playwright.
Yeah.
And I had already had a number of plays premiere in Toronto. But what I had never experienced was, rather than like writing a play by me going home and closing the door and unplugging the phone and sitting at my computer to type, it was the exact antithesis of that. It was, don't be alone. Don't be in a place of private and personal meditation and recording of thought, but go out into the community and meet people and talk to people and learn who they are and what they've been through. And only once you have that connection and that conversation, that piece of community that's starting to get woven together? Can the work start to build? And then going, and with that play in particular, it was going and working on Mike Beretta's farm and, being literally down in the basement in the granary, shoveling grain and
the huge meals. Do you remember the huge meals we had?
Yeah, and driving all over like southwestern Ontario and going into these, beautiful basements and talking to all these old folks who remember the thrashing era, which was really at the core of that show. But it definitely changed my whole way of thinking about what art making was meant to be and who it was for. I think that was the biggest thing, was I came away from that going, oh, so my job is not actually just to express myself.
Exactly.
It's like, oh no. My job is actually to pay as much attention as possible. And the idea that the theater, I think that was where I first learned that the theater didn't belong to me. The theater belonged to the community. And that I had a role to play within that. I think that's that storyteller piece, is that it was that interesting thing. And you and I have talked about this before too, the tension between being a storyteller and a story keeper, right? The story keeper is a big responsibility, right? It's that thing of you gather community, we listen to them all, share their perspective, and then we have a responsibility to try to take that, hold it, keep it, and carry it onto the stage to reflect it back. It's huge. And you've done that a lot with like personal family story too.
Yeah, always.
Yeah.
They hate me and I'm just joking. Same. I think that's probably our thread. Like, Blyth changed my life. A little different trajectory. I started as a guest artist with a young company and then took over the young company and was with them for a couple of years. And I would say that experience, and I was taking over for you, and I saw the way that you brought that love of community to them, that there was something really special about valuing and saying, like, this trickles down to like what you guys are doing on the stage. We are asking the same of these young people, like so young, from 11 to 21. It was like such a range, and they had a huge, huge impact on my career and just the way that I tell stories about, like, we're both these kids from Scarborough. What the hell are we doing? You too, we're all three of us from Scarborough.
Represent
what?
Really well
like,
done.
what are we doing in the middle of a farm field?
Yeah.
But it came to just like always knowing that I was an outsider and like coming into this community and going, oh, I'm going to embrace that I'm an outsider because my outsiderness is feeding the curiosity of to know who you are. And so like the joy of spending every single day with these amazing kids who you show up with curiosity about their lives and ask them to tell stories of what it's like growing up, and them telling me that like basically they're arsons, that the joy of their lives are setting things on fire. Like, that's important. Like just to be in a zone of constant play, like curiosity, story gathering, and just playing. We did it in Young Company, and then that's mirrored for them when we see what's happening on the main stage with all of these amazing shows that we all know is a legacy of collective creation. That made a huge, huge impact on me.
Yeah.
And like, the trajectory of going from Young Company to being commissioned to assistant directing to writing allowed me the growth to grow into the community as both an outsider but as a friend. Yeah. And like to sit in the audience and go, I know you, and to write for them in this, I agree with you. It's a huge responsibility that I don't take lightly to write for the Blyth audience, because they'll let you know.
Right. They will stop you in the grocery store
street
and tell you,
Or like my fairy godparents will let me know. The people who I billet with will let me know.
Yeah.
And it's been it's what I carry with me through all of the play creation. That there's someone on the other end of the script. That it doesn't live in a vacuum.
Absolutely.
To think of the audience first.
Well, that's a really critical point. I mean, and both of you have raised it. Something I've been thinking about a lot lately is like, and I think especially in a moment of isolation, we're talking about all these, the society being isolated, and that I don't think it's possible to write great plays as a like discrete playwright entity. Is that somehow we do have to be in community, we have to be in relationship, and I think it's really, really interesting that like, both of you really before doing a lot of the writing that you've done for the stage, I mean, aside from the collective, is like the time that gets spent in the audience too, the time that gets spent watching other artists on that stage, watching the shows that are being performed, watching the way the audience hears and responds and receives, and then going and learning that and being a part of that, so that when we go back in and we then put that offer forward. And I think that's part of it too, is it raises the stakes, right? As it's not simply writing a play and walking away from it. It's writing a play knowing that the people who see it know who you are, probably where you live, and are going to be impacted, and going to be thinking about it, and going to be involved in it. I think that's a really profound efficacy of playwriting. It's really a recognition that it has meaning both in the moment and beyond, that it impacts the town, it impacts the countryside, the way we think about our place within it. It's really, really powerful.
Yeah, well, that just, while you're talking about that, it brings to mind the last collaboration that Gil and I did was in the wake of Wettlaufer, and it just put me in the moment of that because of all the shows, like, your beautiful show, Prairie Nurse. I was in the audience for that, and you're bringing something very special, like stories that people don't know about, but then maybe are secretly in there and haven't come out yet, right? Just like the production that you just did. And so it's not always like, yay, let's celebrate the change in farming of the 50s, or, let's talk about burning things down with the young company. Like sometimes what we did was a really dangerous and difficult territory. That conversation with the community was the highest stakes I've ever had, and we landed it, and so much so that because we were writing about a serial killer, really we were writing about a larger scope of the long-term care system, but we had family members in the audience who we had spoken with, whose parents and aunts and friends had actually been murdered by this woman who was just going through, she'd been sentenced, I guess, and to the end that was a lot to carry, and I'm happy to say, like, not to toot our horn, but I'm still, every 2 weeks, I'm in touch with one of those victims. We've become really good friends. Like when you said you become friends and friendships, I'm thinking while we're talking about all the relationships that I've developed with some people who are not, writers or actors, but Ray Bird, the Michael Ondaatje, like all these people who are part of Blyth. And I think it's like something to say in this conversation is, if you go through this profound experience of Blyth and learning about new ways of creating stories and how many people come running to the theater to see it, and you go through all these wonderful things we're talking about, and then you go off to your next gig at another theater company, you got to change your expectations, because not every company, and a lot of companies develop new work in Canada, and I shouldn't speak for them, but I've never encountered anything like what I have in Blyth that has helped support me and help me do the things that I'm doing now. I'm doing a play independently now, I was telling you about earlier. And everything I learned from Blyth is everything I learned. It's not about playwriting or play creating. Finding a story, learned it from Blyth, a story that people will find relatable, and then how to have that conversation with the community. So if somebody asks me, like, what is the thing that Blyth can give an artist, it's that, and it's truly one of the only places I've worked that has done that for me and taught me that.
Yeah, you point out something, Kelly, that I think is really important, is the idea of family. and is something that I've talked about a lot, is the idea of the Blyth family.
Right.
And calling people members of the Blyth family, and that's the way that people think about it. Like everybody from those playwrights to the people who worked in wardrobe, people who worked in who've been working in the basement in the props department, right? Like everybody thinks of it as being part of the Blyth family, and that's a really critical. I think it's really important, because part of, I think, family too is both about an embrace, but it's also about pushing too. Mm-hmm. It's also about, as a family member, asserting yourself and having a story and having it's both a place of belonging, but also a place where you are safe to express yourself in a singular way that it isn't maybe available to you everywhere, which I think is really, really special. Family.
And generations now.
Generations.
Because we were like, I felt like a new crop or generation in Blyth, and now look at all of the children and the young artists that you both have worked with the Young Company. I'm guessing a lot of them are having a big impact on the world right now.
Talk
about that.
When I encounter like Cam and their company, Cal and Company, when it just Sam and Josie, who's at the theater now, to see them grow up. It's one of the most memorable things I remember when we opened Prairie Nurse in 2013. Duncan and Linda threw an opening party at their house for me. My parents came. My parents brought all the food that I had written about in the show, and they spread it out. And then Sam and Cam were there, and they were in my first Young Company, and now they had just they were probably 3 or 4 years out of university, and they were in the corner of Duncan and Linda's house, and they said to me, Mary Beth, I don't know if this is the right word to tell you, but we're so proud of you. And it was like, I'm crying.
Yeah.
It meant the world. Like, how often do you have that generational investment come back to you, and the joy of seeing their work? Like, I've seen you in an audience to watch their shows, and I recognize that. I recognize their curiosity and their joy of performance and what they do. It's really exciting and special, and I adore it. I adore those moments. Formative.
Now, speaking of Prairie Nurse, I mean, it's gone on to have a pretty incredible life of late. Multiple productions across the country. Also, the recording for the podcast on CBC. And now, I mean, really, it is one of what you've been seeing as a trilogy for some time.
Yeah.
I've now kind of embarked on those other pieces. How is that? I mean, how is the to be biting into that scope of story, right? The family epic.
Yeah. Well, like it all started with Prairie Nurse and my mom standing in coming to see a show before Prairie Nurse was Prairie Nurse, right, and standing in the middle of Main Street and going, this is just like Saskatchewan. And it was like, bang, thanks, Mom. Thanks for the story. But to know that I could imagine a story. I think you came up to me when I had just been whispering to some people about, I think I'm writing another play about the same people. Like, you messaged me so here, there's a sequel.
Right.
But that kind of support and enthusiasm and yes to my imagination and my desire to want to continue this thing, and for me to be, I don't know what it is, I think it's this, and for you to be like, yeah, here, take the time, come up, what do you need? That has been everything. And to know that, it's so special to to be surprised by the circumstances that we're in, to know that there's now this, again, an outdoor stage at Blyth. And when I'd written the first draft of the play, so the second play is set in 1993 under the Saskatchewan sky, and imagining it in the theater at Blyth, and now going like, oh, wait a second, you mean under the sky at Blyth? That... Like how, like to get that sandbox to play in, who gets that sandbox?
Oh yeah, and you and I talked really early on, because I remember there was a stage direction in
Oh my
in
God.
the Waltz early on.
Oh yeah,
and
no,
was
it's
like
it's in the script.
Off stage, we hear his hatchback arrive.
His Honda Civic
his Honda
arrive.
Civic hatchback arrives, and I remember saying to you, it's like, well, what if we could actually have him arrive in a Honda Civic hatchback?
I know. And then for me going, yes, I know you can, because I saw that stagecoach drive through the campground. Like to know that you can write something and be like, and have somebody on the other end go, yeah, we can do that. Like who, of all of us playwrights who are part of the family, you know that somebody's writing like, and I brought a goat on stage, and everybody's like, yep, we got 5 of them.
Yeah.
Like
Another goat.
The possibilities, like I've never gotten a no. It's amazing.
Well, interesting to that too, like the no. That's really interesting. Just thinking about something.
Not yet.
Like, no. It's like I'm working on it. I owe Mary Beth a no. But no, that. Well, I was just thinking about Cottage Guest, and where Cottage Guest started as a premise, right? And then which was very, very funny and very, very simple.
Yeah. And now it's the third play.
Now it's a third play.
And now it's not a comedy.
Now it's not a comedy anymore. Now it's far more complicated as a story. But I remember you first talking to me about that shift too, of what that play now had to become.
Yeah.
And that being really special to me too, of like, I think that's part of the commitment to playwrights too, rather than just a commitment to a play, right? Is being committed to family members, or being, you don't, disown the family after Christmas, right? You stay family all through the year, right? And how do we find what that is? And that you found yourself going, I actually can't write the thing that I thought this was going to be. But in no way did that mean for Blyth or for me that was somehow a time to switch. Well, then, I don't want to develop it anymore.
Yeah.
It was clear that, like, actually you were going to go to that deeper place, to that place of more meaning for yourself as a writer. Mm-hmm. And that has, undeniable import and value, right? As it becomes, that's part of it too, right? Is I think that comes back to this issue of community, or the idea of community that I think is so important, is in those places as becoming like storytellers and keepers of stories, is also the welcome, like the degree of welcome. When I think back, something like Wettlaufer for sure, the fact that those families welcomed us into their homes, made us pots of tea and cookies, and sat down with us and shared what they were experiencing and what they were going through, and that we were trying to share what we were giving back, and that place of trust, right? I think that is just what underpins the whole of real play development, is about trusting the process, trusting the writer, trusting the company, trusting each other, right? That it is so much the fiber by which we're able to tell stories, right? And I think for an audience too, right? An audience has this amazing, I think this is one of the things I love so much about Blyth, is the degree of trust that's there from that audience, right? Like, folks come into the theater knowing that they don't know the story, but trusting that they will go along for the ride, and that they will come away from it changed or growing or with impacted in some profound way. And I think that's an incredible act, right? To do that. It really, really is. And then similarly too, like part of new play development, I remember in my first season calling donors and talking to people. And I talked to one old guy on the phone, and he said, I love the Blyth Festival. I said, oh, great. He said, yeah, we've seen some wonderful plays there over the years. I said, oh, that's fantastic. He said, and boy, have we seen some stinkers. I've seen some stinkers. But for him, it was almost like it was part of the sport, right? It was like he was willing to take the leap and to trust and to roll the dice. And if he happened to be in the room for one that just didn't come together, that was still going to be...
Or for him, together for him. Yeah.
That's still part of the fun, right? That's still part of the excitement of it. It's like that kind of... That risk-taking that's there, I think, for the writers and for the company and for the audience, right? That's part of the... it's really profound.
For Wettlaufer, there was an actor in the company who joined late, and because another actor had to leave due to a crisis, and so she hadn't been so much a part of the conversations and that connection with community. She just came in and needed to learn her lines and get on stage, and so the after the show thing at Blyth, like the after the show thing, which is where people are, they don't want to meet you outside because they're crying so hard or whatever. They're having such a release about it. It directly affects them so much. And so she went through this thing of, can you just come out and meet this family who is involved, or they just want to say hi? And she said to me, Kelly, this isn't like doing a play. It's like doing an event. And I thought, yeah, that's what it ought to be every time. And that's what that's what it has been for these shows that we've done in this tradition at Blyth. Yeah. That they're bigger, they carry a responsibility, and you can't just like slam the door on your Honda Civic and drive back to Toronto. And, you have a certain responsibility to community as you step further into positions of leadership within the theater, which is another thing. Mary Beth, you talked about how you started, with the young company and directing main stage, writing these amazing plays with legacy, and that's been possible. I don't want to speak for you, but I felt for me, immediately I wanted to engage in leadership. I wanted to work with that young company I worked with. I wanted to start, using these things and skills that I'd learned with the next generation. And I think a lot of great leaders have come out of Blyth through the process of showing up, wanting to be an actor or a playwright. And then you can talk about the other side of theater and production and where those careers have gone as well.
Yeah.
I see it as stewardship, right?
Interesting.
Like it's when you talk about you're telling these stories about people opening their doors to you, and that's on the shoulders of all the work that every generation has put into asking the community to open their doors to us. There was one year, and like that feeds through, like the community knows to open their doors. One year with a young company, I could never do this in Toronto. I had them do a scavenger hunt in the town. And the last step of the scavenger hunt was to go to Scrimmagers, get a box of craft dinner, knock on someone's door, and cook the craft dinner. And they all did. Like, they all were they were in the community, like, making craft dinner at people. It was just the most Blythian thing that could happen. So there's that amount of trust. But the other thing that your storytelling reminds me of is the year that we did Prairie Nurse was also another farm show. Was that the right title?
Oh, yeah, Beyond the Farm Show.
Beyond the Farm Show. And we were switching rehearsal halls, and on the floor was a little Post-it that said "Birth of a Calf." And then a few days after was the opening of the show, and Sue and I are in the balcony. Sue Minor, the director of Prairie Nurse, and so many, this is such a formative experience, is when you know the pockets of the people who you interviewed are in the audience, and then they're there, and that's the show unto itself. There's the stage, and then there's the audience who recognizes themselves. And when Birth of a Calf came on, there was this group just in the balcony, just going it was them, that recognition. And Sue and I were just weeping. It was the most beautiful scene to see the birth of a calf, the people who were interviewed for it, the audience receiving it, and just being in the back row of the balcony. Like, when do you ever get that experience? And so there's an incredible, I hear you, like there's leadership, there's stewardship, and part of that leadership and stewardship is a real sense of responsibility, where I think that I know your work, and we bring that to all of our work, and we feel when that responsibility is lacking in other things that we see on stage. Like, there's never a question of, like, whatever the outcome may be to your member who said, like, there were great shows and there were stinkers, the impetus of it is always, we have a responsibility to our audience. What are they going to love? Not like, what's the zeitgeist of theater in Canada right now? It's like, your responsibility is, what does this square 2 kilometer, like, what does this radius of Huron County want? Like, during the whole Prairie Nurse thing, so many people asked me about, like, this play and it resonating in Saskatchewan or Manitoba or Toronto. It's like, that's what blows my mind. I wrote it for Blyth.
Yeah.
That was the audience I wrote for. Super cool that I'm so pleased you love my play. But it was for Blyth that I wrote it. And, like, that's a privilege.
Well, and then that sense of stewardship and responsibility. I mean, I do think all of us feel that too, that we do recognize the privilege of being in communion with that audience, and then the responsibility to maintain it, the responsibility to to hold that theater to a certain standard too, which I think is really critical to it, to the whole endeavor, right? Is folks want to believe. And I think that's part of how we keep it there, right? Is that we continue to have that place of stewardship. And then at the same time, too, and I think is really important, like, and I'll say it goes right down to the board of directors. Like, one thing that I can tell you, like, in conversation with them, like, every year when we're talking about programming for the year ahead, one thing we talk about is what is the courage piece, right? Like, what is the courage piece? And that's something that, like, even members of the board, that's a question mark for them, is they want to know that when we go into the next season, that there is going to be a show that also does keep it moving forward, keep us moving forward, keep challenging us, keep giving the audience an opportunity to expand and to grow and to try to embrace some more challenging conversations too. And I think it's one of the great privileges of being artistic director, is actually to have an audience that is invested in that way, to feel that kind of support, right? Of an audience that is interested, that is invested in being pushed a little. That's really exciting.
Yeah. Yeah. So you can see for the opportunities for playwrights, collaborative playwrights, however we do these things, like, think of my journey there with the plays I've done. They're so wildly different, and the ones that were courageous or experimental are just going to be a really darn good time for the audience. So there's such a range of possibilities of what you can do, offer, and how you can grow. And I really do go back to, when you leave the Blyth family and go to your other theater families, you're taking that aesthetic with you. So to me, Blyth, it's a thing, I guess, that quote Jillian Kiley says, the universal is local without walls, like focusing on one simple story for a simple place can have resonance everywhere else. There's so much value in it. So it's not to say that we create these plays in this space just for them. Like, I think the idea is that these stories can reach. They can be translated and performed in other countries, and hopefully there'll be somebody going to see Prairie Nurse in New Zealand or Iceland or wherever, that they have those stories in them as well, and they relate to it, and they're done so beautifully because they were developed in a place of excellence, of profound excellence and experience.
And I think a place of like respect, of profound respect.
Right.
That it's like there is so much respect on the part of the artist for the community at Blyth, and it's been engendered over the last, like 4, almost 5 decades. There's so much respect that I think we as artists look at the local stories, fictional or non-fictional. We look at the local stories and we go, these deserve to be on a stage and to have the full weight of a highly professional, experienced artistic team to bring them to as full a color and as full a life as we possibly can. And I think that level of respect for community, for the value of the story, is part of what makes it so special to be a part of, right? And makes it have that kind of transcendent quality. It's built out of a place of respect, right? We don't ever put plays on stage that in any way are derisive or deriding of the community in which we are operating and we living, right? It's not cheap in that way. It's a profound place of respect. Speaking of respect, I just want to say I respect you both so much, and I'm so grateful that you did this today. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Gil.
Thanks.